think the first time that I considered the question of why are there so many faiths on the earth if there's only one God was probably going home from my own baptism. And I remember being driven home in the family car and I guess contemplating the afterglow of baptism and thinking, isn't this a remarkable coincidence that of all the churches, I ended up in the right one? And so at the time, it just seemed to me remarkably good fortune. And I don't think I gave a lot of thought at that age to what it meant that there were so many others that might not be the right one in that line of thinking. And I think the next time that I became, I guess, profoundly influenced by my interactions with a person of another faith was really quite many years later, because I wasn't very active in the Mormon Church through most of my years growing up. But when I began graduate school at UNC Chapel Hill, I became close friends with a young woman in the graduate program. And it wasn't too long after we had formed this friendship that I realized, well, she told me she was a nun. She didn't wear any distinctive clothing of her order, but she was a nun. And we ended up becoming very, very close friends. She was probably my closest friend in graduate school. And I think that it was that friendship that opened my eyes to the fact that there were people that weren't deluded and they weren't misdirected. They were, in her case, for example, performing a very godly work. They were doing wonderful things. She was a wonderful, wonderful human being. And I think the thing that I also appreciated was that she had the same feelings toward me and my faith. There wasn't any attempt to evangelize the other, because we both felt that we had been called in some way to find God by a particular path and to have a particular mission to fill in our own way and within our own faith tradition. And I think that was the first time that I began to really fully appreciate a person of another faith on their own religious terms. My wife was raised Roman Catholic, and I, like many Mormons, had long imbibed a particular narrative about the great apostasy. And so I think I had come to think of an apostate Christendom as being bankrupt of any spiritual or religious values. And it was my wife who, as an ex-Catholic, pointed out to me that in the book of Revelation, in chapter 12, there's a discussion of the church fleeing into the wilderness, where it is nurtured of the Spirit. And it was her view that what that meant was that there was never a time when God had completely withdrawn His Spirit or His presence from the earth, or that the earth had been devoid of people who were under the influence of that Spirit. And to this day, we find, for example, that we have a friend who is the musical director of a Presbyterian church in Richmond. And their commemoration of Easter is so beautiful, so rich and resonant, not just with the music, but with the readings, with the whole liturgy, that we attend those services at Easter time. And in my wife's case in particular, she feels that what we realize on an occasion like that is that we share the most important belief with the Christian world, which is the belief in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so that makes it possible for us to participate in that worship without reservations. We are celebrating what we share with the rest of the Christian world. And given the fact that most of our experience in the church tends to be limited to, in our case, in rural Virginia, very small, very tiny wards, where you can feel very isolated and very cut off from a larger brotherhood in the church or within the Christian world. In many ways, that's a very, I think, therapeutic and enriching experience that we share. So I have a holy envy of the richness and the enthusiasm and the fullness with which much of the Christian world celebrates those holy days like Easter that tend to receive rather less attention sometimes in the Mormon worship calendar. I have a close friend and colleague who has spent most of his life as an agnostic, and he decided about 10 years ago that he was going to become fully engaged and committed in his religious tradition. And so he made an announcement to a small circle of friends that he was going to begin to live after the strict manner of this particular religious community. And it included dietary and dress and a whole range of particular regulations and rules. And as he made this announcement, it occurred to me that at the time he was living with his girlfriend. And so I posed the question to him rather boldly, perhaps under the circumstances, and I said, but doesn't your religious tradition forbid premarital sexual relations? And I remember he caught himself up short, and then he just blurted out, well, some things are just not negotiable. And we didn't have a very extended discussion on that point, but I think that, you know, the position that I expressed was how, you know, under what kind of a conception of religion can we be selective once we have made the commitment to engage in a relationship of discipleship? I don't think that he found any of my criticisms persuasive enough to trouble him too very much. But that kind of thing I think I have a hard time understanding. That at one and the same time we're going to acknowledge a supreme being and make a commitment, a life-changing commitment to a religious system, but do so selectively. I would be devastated if one of my children decided to marry into a different faith. And that is because of, I would say it's because of both sociological and religious reasons. I'm familiar with the statistics, for example, that show that Latter-day Saints who marry within the Latter-day Saint faith have the greatest chance of a successful marriage of any kind of a marriage within or across denominational lines. So there's that benefit that accrues. And I also would hope that through the way in which we have lived our religion and taught our religion, that she would have shared our convictions that that's the best way that one can pattern one's life. But I think we also have developed the kind of relationship with our children that we realize that they're independent young entities, and we have had two of them drift away. We maintained a very good and close and loving relationship through those times, and one of them made the decision in subsequent years to return to fully embrace the faith and live it again. The other has not. And yet I can say that our relationship with that daughter is just as strong and loving at this point as it is with any of our other children. Well, I think one reason why she feels, all of our children have felt comfortable asking the hard questions is because I've said before that I think that if I have a spiritual gift, it's the capacity for doubt. And I think I call that a spiritual gift for a few reasons. One is because I think it's given me tremendous empathy for people both within and without my faith tradition who never arrive at a position of certainty. And also because it means that I am always having to exert my will to choose and to affirm and to embrace one of multiple possibilities. And I think that's when we're most fully alive to what human freedom means, is when we don't just exercise a physical freedom, but we're exercising an intellectual or moral freedom by finding, in many ways, a kind of equilibrium between competing possibilities. And we have to exert ourselves to choose and embrace one of those. And so I think my children grew up in an environment where doubt was not something to be shunned or to be feared.
But it wasn't a sin.
It wasn't a sin.
Yeah.
It wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
It was a possibility and an opportunity in many ways.